Welcome, Dungeon Hackers. Today we have another video in our series about how cities and towns would adapt to having monsters nearby. As we've discussed in the past, many people portray villages as simply medieval towns, but real-world medieval towns didn't have dragons and owlbears rampaging in the wilderness. So how would an actual town change depending on the types of monsters that may be nearby? Subscribe now so that you can check out that playlist, which I'll also link in the description below. In today's video, we're going to discuss how a village might adapt if there were sentient plant creatures living nearby. Many of the plant creatures in Dungeons & Dragons are very hard to notice and differentiate from actual plants. This natural camouflage makes it dangerous to wander into the forest alone, as the tree you're passing may reach down and grab you. I think that the first countermeasure that a village would probably use is to clear out some space around the village itself. Imagine 100 or even 200 yards of open ground with no plants, no shrubbery, so that you don't have to worry about, is that bush a bush or is that bush going to attack me? Another countermeasure that villages may use would be having ready access to fire. In researching for this video and looking at plant creatures, I noticed a disturbingly large amount of plant creatures that weren't vulnerable to fire. In fact, there were some that were even resistant to fire. Now, this was strange to me as they're literally made out of fuel for fire, but many plant creatures are still vulnerable to fire. So I think having fire nearby, readily available, would be very beneficial. Maybe braziers around the town. This would allow villagers to grab fire that they could use against these plant creatures. And if you're using plant creatures that are resistant to fire damage, well, maybe it's a good time to homebrew those a little bit. To go along with having a cleared out area around your town, maybe you could have some large livestock that eats plants. Herbivores like cows and giraffes eat a lot of plant matter, and the more that you have nearby might allow you to help keep the area clear of plants, but also as a bit of an early warning sign. Because if all of a sudden the cow starts screaming and running into town, then maybe that shrubbery wasn't just a shrubbery after all.
We want a shrubbery! You must find another shrubbery!
There's also a couple of spells that could be very useful for villages. If you've got a few people in the town that can cast some lower level spells, like locate plants and animals and speak with plants, this might allow you to find these plant creatures ahead of time or even converse with them, maybe come to some sort of an agreement. And we'll take a look at what a relationship with the plant creatures might look like a little bit later in the video, so stick around for that. But it gives you an opportunity to find and perhaps stop any conflict before it ever even begins. How might life in one of these villages be different than life in other villages that aren't surrounded by monstrous plant creatures? Well, first of all, druids and rangers would be very important to the society at large. Anybody that can naturally deal with plants and animals like druids and rangers can would be very valuable to the village. They can identify plants more easily. They can track the movements of these plants. They can use the spells that we mentioned a moment ago. Druids and rangers would be the first line of defense for any town surrounded by some sort of plant creatures. The town people itself may actually be primarily carnivorous. Maybe they eat a lot of meat and very little fruits and vegetables because having orchards and stuff would just be inviting plant creatures to hide and set up an ambush for people that come to harvest everything. If they're on some sort of a trade route, then maybe they trade for fruits and vegetables in exchange for the meats that they harvest from the animals that they have nearby that graze to kill all the plants. This saves the town from having to have a lot of places for these plant creatures to hide, while still giving them stuff that they can trade. Any sort of festivals or large gatherings, weddings, and things like that, even Market Day itself, would probably all take place around some sort of a bonfire. Again, it's important to have fire readily available as a source of protection against these plant creatures, especially the ones that are vulnerable, but also the other ones as well. So what about if you did have some sort of a symbiotic relationship between the village and the plants? There are some plant creatures that aren't evil. Think of the treants in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for example, and even other plant creatures that are just sort of indifferent and act more like just wild animals, especially if you've got druids and rangers that can speak with these plant creatures. Even if they don't speak common themselves, if they can understand, you may be able to work out some sort of a bargain with them.
Oh, by the way, this is a friend of mine, Tree.
I am Groot!
I am Steve Rogers.
If you can find something that the plant creatures want, then you can exchange that for protection. And even if not protection, then you can exchange it for just leaving each other alone. Maybe you can provide them with a lot of fertilizer from all the animals that you have so that they can grow better in more suitable soil. Maybe you can help protect them from wildfires and things like this, diverting waterways so that they have plenty of water to grow. In exchange, they might also give you magical wood. I have to think that a branch off an oak tree would not be as strong and powerful as a branch off a treant. Now, I'm not suggesting chopping down your neighborhood friends. However, even in the real world, we know that pruning trees makes them grow better. And even live, healthy trees occasionally drop branches. If a treant were to shed some of its branches, then perhaps those could be exchanged to be used to make magical weapons. The haft of an axe, for example. Maybe some of these magical plant creatures even have berries and fruit that grow on them that can be harvested by the village to thus be sold or even eaten. Maybe they're more healthy than normal fruits. Perhaps they even have magical properties themselves. Overall, there's a lot of different ways that a village might change in order to adapt to a world where creatures made of plant material live nearby. Whether they're good plant creatures or evil plant creatures, in both cases, the village is going to be a little different than other villages along the road. So let me know in the comments below how you think a village would adapt. Do you like these ideas? Do you have other ideas? I'd love to hear them. And what are some other creatures that you would like for me to make a video about how a village would adapt to them? Remember that this is your game and you can always hack the dungeon.